the Two Men and a Business Continuity Plan podcast. Navigating success through uncertainty.
Hello, and welcome to our podcast, aptly named Two Men and a Business Continuity Plan with Charlie and James. And for those of you who are new to the podcast, let's get some introductions out of the way to begin with. Charlie, who are you?
So, Charlie, a business continuity practitioner for about the last 25 years, give or take, and own background is military, power, water, and consultancy.
Well, that's very good, the power background anyway, because that's going to be our feature today. I'm James McAllister. I did 30 years within a policing environment, and then the last 11, I've owned my own company, specialising in business continuity and crisis management. So, what are we going to do?
Just on my power experience, don't tell anyone. I was in the retail bit, so it was all call centres and pricing and credit management. It wasn't the powery bit, but just don't tell anyone. I'll just pretend to pontificate on power. Like I know what I'm talking about.
It's good. Yeah, we always do a bit of that. Right, today's topic then, the global power crunch. Business continuity in an overloaded grid. With demand surging, grids aging, and green transitions underway, can businesses keep the lights and servers on? So a little bit of background then. As we know, the world is going towards cleaner fuel. Global electricity usage is soaring. Data centers. The use of AI, I believe, is putting a massive drain on the electrical systems. Electric vehicles, don't get me started on electrical vehicles. Hate them, but electric vehicles. Industrial electrification, global electricity capacity is expected to double in some areas of the globe over the next up to 2030. Grid infrastructure is under pressure, heat waves triggering blackouts in Texas, southern Europe, energy shortages in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, and even in the UK, delaying grid connections until 2037 for some renewable energy projects. That's going to give the green lot a bit of a kicking, isn't it? If that's going to be waiting until 2037. So, Charlie, first question. What do power losses actually mean for businesses in the future then?
I think I was just actually looking at some of the biggest power outages in history, and it was quite interesting that they were actually about 10, 15 years ago. So some of them, I think the biggest one was in India, where the whole of India seemed to have lost power, but it was like 2006, 2007. But I do think we're slightly in electricity in a perfect storm here. Is that you're absolutely right about green, cleaner energy.
What does this mean in terms of impact for businesses going forward for the future?
I think within this, the business risk is going up. And because our power mainly stays on, I don't think we sometimes think about it very much. And, some of us will have standby generators and that sort of equipment, but often standby generations is just enough to keep the lights on or to keep absolutely critical bits of our business, but it's not enough to keep all our business on there. And we talked about Heathrow a little while ago. We thought about the cascading impacts in Spain when the grid collapsed. And I think, all those bits, things like electric cars, more charging there, cleaner energy, renewables, it's fine when the wind blows and when the Hebrides where the wind blows quite a lot. But if the wind doesn't blow in, then, all that power is taken out. And for us in the UK, we're not in the sort of richest country at the moment, and if you can cut the power grid, if you can lack of investment, if you can the headroom above what we normally need and what we need at peak, if you reduce that down, we're setting ourselves up to fail at some time, because something will go down, something else will go down, and then you get the sort of Swiss cheese model of all the holes line up and bang, your grid goes down. So I think, and you're absolutely dead right about AI. I think AI use 9 times more electricity than a normal data center. You know, it's very power hungry, and we're all mad for AI at the moment. We want lots of it. So I think we're in the bit of a middle of a perfect storm. I don't know what your thoughts on this one are.
Yeah, well, I mean, governments around the world are planning for this. I mean, I've been out of the police 11 years, but I know for the last 20 years, I've taken part in a number of Black Start exercises where we in the Northwest region and all the other regions would be up and we'd do this great big UK-based exercise. What would you do if you lost power? So, I mean, it's always been there as a potential problem. You know, it's not just now, it's always been around. And obviously, clearly, I mean, the UK government has this weird and wonderful thing called the Electricity Supply Emergency Code, which is all about fair distribution of power in the event that we can't produce enough power or there's a problem where we ration it, where you get it for a few hours and then somebody else gets it for a few hours, etc., etc. So, I mean, governments have been planning for this for a long time, but I'm not quite sure businesses really give the "we would ever lose power" type approach. I mean, you mentioned generators as a primary fallback solution, but I recently was looking for a small generator purely because I'm as a a householder would be concerned if we didn't have any power. So I was looking for a smaller type diesel generator and then found out that Honda, within the very near future, are not going to be making diesel generators anymore because of the green push, because of certainly the governments, certain European governments are going to ban diesel generators. Now, I don't know whether that's the small ones that you like take on site, for example, for construction industry, or we're talking about all diesel generators. Because imagine the world where we lose power, but there aren't any generators because your uninterrupted power supply batteries might last you 30 minutes, maybe slightly longer. But then we're into the generators. So I love the concept of protecting the world. Love it. However, you've got to think we've got to support where we are, and it would be lovely to do all these great things. But what about the risk to not being able to do our primary functions as human beings? Because the problem is we're not cave dwellers. We can't light our own fires. We can't, go and hunt an elk, bring it home, skin it and eat it. We're not all growing our own vegetables. We're not all capable of doing things because we are becoming quite nanny state, where if we're not looked after by the state, what are we going to do? But I think the state's got to be careful that they think joined up when it comes to power. That's going to be the problem.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think power, maybe in business continuity, we all know about the maximum scale of instant. I don't know if that's still in the GPG, but probably it's in there. But we know the concept is to say, if a meteorite hits past London, the middle of London, then we're in, the man with the radish is king kind of thing, because it's bigger than the incident that we've been, trying to deal with. But I think there's a difference between short power cuts. So that, kind of day or two, we saw that in Spain, we saw that in Heathrow. We occasionally get them across. Well, we had Storm Floyd in Floyd, was it? A couple of days ago. Magnificent waves. I was on the west coast of Cornwall looking at the waves there. But anyway, so we have people do power cuts. So I think there is a difference between businesses dealing with it. Can we shut down for a couple of hours or a couple of days? And then the prolonged power cut. And the prolonged power cut, I think, for a lot of people is on the too difficult pile, because we're used. And I always think with power cuts, there's a really interesting dynamic about what you do for your staff. Do you have any responsibility for your staff beyond them working? So if you have a standby generator in your building and you can work normally, but actually all the hinterlands outside has no power because it's a prolonged power cut, do you have any responsibility to your staff? And can you expect them to work? Or do you actually say, you know, at the worst, the best, worst case, whatever, we have rota cuts and they have a few hours a day, then can you expect them to come in and work the rest of the day? Or are they actually massively doing all their laundry, charging every device, you know, probably can't go to school, so they're looking after kids. So there's an interesting dilemma in that about the power cut, about actually your responsibility to your people and what you can do, what you can't do. So I think that's an interesting. What's your thoughts on that? Just specifically that point on in a disaster, what is a business's responsibility for its people?
Well, I mean, I think legally the responsibility ends at the door, really.
Yeah.
But I think morally and ethically, some businesses may well take it beyond that. But I mean, legally, people come into work, you look after them, health and safety, whatever, HR regulations. But when they actually toddle off home, it's down to them, really. I mean, I've responded to large-scale disasters around the world with the European Commission. And you look, for example, my last was in 2013, Operation Haiyan in the Philippines, where, I mean, it's the biggest typhoon to ever hit the earth. It was enormous. And clearly everything was affected, not just power, but water and food and sanitation and housing and everything. And the government were doing their bit, but the people were doing their bit. I mean, I remember being out in a far off place in the outskirts of Tacloban, and the people were rebuilding the houses on their own. They were doing stuff on their own. And businesses, I mean, because they get 25 typhoons a year, they're used to it, but not at this scale. But it's like things happen and we have to get on with it. And they're very resilient. And the businesses are as resilient as the people. And they rely on the people to come in and open up the businesses, because without the businesses, nothing survives. And I think, organizations need to look at the contractual arrangements they have with staff. And in the event of, what would they do?
Yeah, because I did some interesting bit in. I went to Costa Rica after Hurricane Maria. It was about a year later. I was speaking to a lawyer for Cemex, that's a big cement company, and she was talking about it. She said she was lucky or well prepared. She had a generator and a large water supply. When the hurricane went through, basically they said for 6 months they had no power, and people were drinking out the lakes because that was the only water. And she used to share her power with her next door neighbor, so she put a sort of plug over the fence and allowed them to plug in their fridge so that they could have some fridge. But what was a couple of really interesting things which I learned from that, which I think is relevant here, is to say very quickly, so cement works, you need cement, but you don't need the cement day one. It's for rebuilding rather than, keeping the
feeding
lights
people.
on. Yeah, and they said within 2 or 3 days, all the staff turned back up to work again, and they walked, they drove, they did whatever they can to get into work, because basically people were bored. Yeah, they were stuck at home with their children and their wives, mainly because it's kind of a male-dominating thing. But they were stuck at home. They needed money as well. You don't if you don't turn up for work, especially in other places, you don't get paid. So lots of people turned up for work. So turning up for work. Of course, they repaired their houses and they kind of made sure their family was safe, but it didn't take more than a couple of days, and any kind of substantial rebuild was done the weekend. But also the other thing that the company did was they big problem was food spoiling because of it's hot in Puerto Rico and it's no electricity. So what they did is they mass bought ice. And then what they used to do is sell it to employees, and you could come in with your cooler box during the day, and then you bought, and it was cheap. It was just to make sure that people didn't spoil it, so it was a token fee, and then they could take it home to keep their house cool for the evening or keep their fridge cool in the evening. So they did kind of do their bit as much as they could, and they tried to bulk buy generators. They tried to do things to help employees. So I think companies can do things there. I think the other point was, which I think comes back to the Heathrow thing, was that recovering after, if your computer reboots, it doesn't really like coming back up again. The same as the IT systems. It is the same with electrical systems in complex electrical in large buildings or manufacturing. They don't like coming back on again, or they had to be done in a set order, otherwise you just blow it over and it starts again. So I think making sure that you can recover your building. So if the building goes out or your manufacturing process, make sure that you know the steps, a bit like a DR plan, know the steps for recovering it. Because if you just try and switch it back on again, it'll just blow. So you have to kind of build the power up, power up this, power up that slowly. So those are some of my sort of thoughts on companies. And
I mean, we talk about it a lot, don't we? What would you do in the event of loss of power? But the testing of loss of power, as you'll be aware, because you run an awful lot of exercises, as do I.
Yeah.
And the thought of doing live play total power loss, where you knock the power off and see what happens, is clearly unthinkable because of all those things you've just mentioned. It would be lovely to knock the power off, but the ramifications of getting everything back on again are, if you percentage wise, I've done it once when we had to change a generator at headquarters when I was in the police. So we had to then plan for, is this going to be safe to do? When is the best time to do it? And everyone was scared to death. When I went to IT and I said, well, what are the chances of us getting 100% back when we turn it on again? And they wouldn't go above 75%. So there's all these kind of things. It's lovely. And everybody goes, well, you need to test power loss more. Well, you can do tabletops all you like. We can do scenario testing all you like to look at what the implications would be without power.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is you've still got to do your pragmatic, operational level technical testing, which everybody hates doing because everybody's scared to death because nobody quite knows how that's going to work out. Have you done many power off exercises?
No, I haven't done any at all. If I can ever think of it.
Would you ever suggest it?
Well, I think sometimes I'm just trying to think about it when is a suitable time. If you're a large manufacturing company, there is times in the year where you have a 2-week shutdown. And maybe that is the time is to practice. And maybe they power down a lot of their machinery and stuff like that. So that may be the opportunity to do it. I don't, yes, I think it is a slightly difficult one that, Heathrow, they got it back within about 8 hours. But I think there's also the issue is a limited amount of people know how to do it. So you do actually know who has the skills, even if you say, well, we don't want to take the risk, but do we know of the people who can actually do it? Do we have a DR type plan for doing it? At least if we have DR type plan, then at least you know where to start, even if it is a little hypothetical because we've never done it, but at least we know where to start, or we can find the right sort of heavy duty people who understand this, who can be sort of on standby to go and right, it's blowing again, right, what do we need to do, how do we need to do that? So it's a difficult one, that power is powering down.
So in the next decade, energy resilience is going to create competitive advantage, i.e., if you can guarantee having your power on, you will be in a much better position to deal with your customers, clients, your wider stakeholders than people who don't. So how are businesses going to better protect themselves in the future so they are more power resilient?
Yeah, I think actually just one bit before we go on to that question is that thing of demand and supply is to say, if I was looking, I did some stuff on the Auckland power outage in 1998, and they had sort of 60,000 workers. The central of Auckland had no power for 60 days. And one of the big issues they had was all the little shops and all the little community in there. Most of the shops all went bust, and the restaurants and all these things go in city centres because they had no power and they had nobody to buy their stuff. And so
Yeah.
one of the interesting bits is I think you have to consider yourself as say who your customer, where your customers, and if we don't have any power, then actually if it's a local problem, yeah. But if it's a kind of Scotland problem or Liverpool problem or Manchester or London, you know, do my customers, are they going to be affected? Do they actually want my products when there is a power cut? Or is actually they're not going to be interested because they can't do it? But I do think power resilience and just showing that you've thought about it, maybe show you've got contingency plans for it. You know, I was doing some interesting work with a government, well, a supplier to government of science, let's put it that way. And you know, they were very, it was really interesting. They were very prescriptive about the DR times they wanted, and to be they wanted to see the DR plans very specifically for the bits they're paying for, and they want to make sure that those RTOs can be met. And I hadn't really met that before. Maybe there's lots of contracts out there that I don't see, but I think that is where you can start actually your competitive advantage, or when you're bidding for work and say, you know, we have thought about the power outage, we have a standby generator, it can actually do a little bit more than just power the lights on. It's our key bits of our processes, we can deliver it. So I think it could be a competitive advantage, but I think you have to balance this thing about, you know, about will your customers want it if it's a prolonged power outage.
Yeah. I mean, things like, do we understand exactly? And I know within my business impact analysis and my risk assessment, I look at utilities. And I'm working with a global seeds firm at the moment, which has sites all over the world that deal with research and development of certain types of seeds. And clearly, a lot of them are in places where natural disasters are the normality. And we've done an awful lot of work on what would you do if you lost electricity? And it's all about, well, we've got generators. You know, but do you know what power you need? Because I'm, you know, minimum business continuity objective. What is the minimum level of service or products you need to deliver? And therefore, let's match that with all our resource categories, one of them being utilities. So if we're supplying 50% of our product, does that mean in reality we need 50% of the power? Well, it rarely does. But
No.
Do we do enough around the science or the mathematics of calculating based on MBCO what power we would need? Because I've tried to do that well over the last year and a half, look at lowering that, not just in case of power, it was in case of a lot of different things. But I think that's something that sophisticated business continuity people need to be more attuned to. And don't get me started on a lot of business continuity consultants and practitioners don't know what MBCO is. That's the starting problem. It's all about getting back to business as usual. And as we know, no, it's not. It's about getting back to MBCO, which hopefully is a lesser level of product and service delivery than you would be doing today. So therefore, theoretically, you would use less resources to achieve it. Therefore, it's quicker to recover than trying to return to BAU. And I think that's something that people need to think about. I also need to think about, are they really, I mean, I work with a lot of companies, and I've mentioned this on training courses, but on the front of the plan, because people are tight and miserable or don't want to invest in uninterrupted power supply generators and other ways of power generation. Right at the beginning, it says this plan will only work if we have mains power supply. Because there's that complete and utter reliance on the fact that your energy provider will always be able to provide you. And I think we as business continuity people need to go beyond that.
Yeah, I think it's a level of sophistication. We've been doing, a lot of organizations been doing this for quite a long time, and it's a sort of level of sophistication to start digging in beyond. I always think RTOs are far too tight, so it is delivering and saying, actually, can you actually deliver what circumstances can and what circumstances can't you deliver these RTOs? What assumptions are we making? Are we like your stuff at the beginning of the plan? It's quite brutal, but I quite like it. At the beginning of the plan, say, if there is no power, then this plan's not going to work. You just got to make it up as you go along.
Because
So
I mean, if you rely on power, what are you going to do? It's not as though, you're not as though you're going to get all your staff on bicycles pedaling around with little dynamos on the back, trying to keep your manufacturing plant going. If you have no other means of power than mains power supply, depending on how you're supplied, clearly, multiple points of mains power supply coming in different substations, blah, 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 it's better. But if you've only got a single source of power from a single substation, then that's, I'm all for, if the top management don't want to invest in resilience, as long as they sign off the risk and that risk is put on the strategic risk register, that when it goes horribly wrong, it's not the poor old BCM who gets it in the neck. It's the top management who signed off the risk.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that in total. I think it is we need to be quite brutal on these things and make sure, say, what you're signing off here. And this is, not everyone can afford standby generators. And so for some organizations, keep the lights on. Well, it doesn't really matter. We're actually a large manufacturer and a big consumer of electricity. So actually, it doesn't really make that much difference, standby generator, because we can't buy a big enough one to actually keep ourselves going. So, that's a business risk, and it can sit there for 30 years and do nothing. The millions of pounds we better spend on more salespeople or modernize the process. So it's always a business. It's always a business risk. But I do think we're living in a tight world with the renewables. I heard that the perfect storm for renewables is a really, really cold winter when the wind stops blowing, because because that's when everyone is peak heating and no windmills are going around. And that is when, we're really at risk. And then, you just need to have one or two generators to fail, and then the whole grid collapse. And we know it takes time to just get the whole grid back up and going again,
Yeah.
Because Cruachan isn't that one of the black start places, because it's hydro, so it will work without any electricity. So that's one of the sort of you need electricity to start the generators to get out. So that's the key place for that. Does the surge power? So I
think we've terrified everybody on this podcast anyway, Charlie. To the fact, but hopefully we've made people think. We need, as business continuity people, at the early stages of planning, the PP3, the analysis section, we need to be looking at what would you do in the event of, because quite often people don't even think about that. I've done lots of BIA reviews where power isn't one of the resource categories that people have considered, and it's like, I'm sorry, there isn't any aspect of anything we do nowadays in business that is not power reliant.
Of course, it'll never happen.
There somewhere.
Of course, it'll never happen.
Yeah, of course, it'll never happen. Yeah, until it does. I was out in South Africa a long time ago, and we had 2 power cuts in the hotel in one evening. So, South Africa knows what it's like to have to ration power, and how power happens very often. I think we can learn a lot from the countries that are getting a lot of these things and have been for the past 20 years. But we're not doing that. We're not really learning. We're just sticking our head in the sand. And as you so rightly said, it's never going to happen anyway, is it? All it is tabloid newspapers scaring us to sell newspapers.
But I think if we look, as we come back full circle, look under the hood as what is your introduction is, we are using more and more power, and clean energy is fine, it's good, but it needs the wind to blow or the sun to shine and those sort of things. We're also maybe lack of investment, because the fact is that clean energy in the end is expensive. It has to be subsidized. And we have at the opposite end of it, lots of poor people whose electricity needs to be subsidized as well. So you have that kind of, we need to put the prices up to pay for the cleaner energy, to pay for the windmills, but we also need to put the price, we can't have the prices too high, because actually then, you know, we'll have fuel poverty and more people in poverty and children dying of hypothermia because their parents can't switch on the, you know, the heat. We've got, so there's, and so the easy way is to just run down the grid and run down our generators, not build new generators, because we can't get the planning permission to do it, because nobody wants a dirty big power station on their doorstep. And so I think the risk is, from a sort of infrastructure point of view, and maybe a likelihood point of view, is going up. So, you know, I think Spain is such a good example of one of those risks that I'm not sure. In Spain, they had lots of power cuts in there, widespread power cuts in their risks, and you saw that people stuck in lifts and people stuck in trains and people stuck here and people stuck there, and it took them 2 or 3 days to get it back.
Obviously, the safety aspect. Yeah,
there's a safety aspect, but I think the risk is, the likelihood is going up.
Yeah, I agree. So, any final words of wisdom for the listeners?
I think there's always something more that we can be doing, and I think it's re-inspired me to think more about making sure that's in the BIA and considering that. And as you say, it can be a managed risk. Say, look, you know, if we lose the power for a long time, we're going to do nothing, but at least it's a managed risk and we understand it.
Yeah, because quite often this is about understanding the risk.
Yeah.
You know, that transparency of, we know what it's going to be, we're not prepared to invest in it, but we realize the impact. And then you take it, because it's all about a game of poker. Risk is playing poker.
Yeah.
Take that risk.
Yeah, and you know, we've discussed it, and if your customers want more resilient tasks, you can pay some more, and buy some standby generators, or do some more stuff. But let's
until Honda stop making them, and then we're all screwed.
Honda stop making. But I think the worst thing as a business continuity manager we can do is, we know there's a risk, and we don't share it with other people, especially senior managers who can make a decision on it.
Yeah, and this is what I think some people don't quite get, the understanding that you elevate risks when you can't solve them, and then you leave it to top management to decide, or they accept the risk. I mean, it's basic risk management, but unfortunately, not everybody realizes that.
Yeah,
Charlie, I'm afraid that's it for our podcast today. Thanks for everybody who's listened. Remember, if you like what you hear, please subscribe, comment, and share with like-minded business continuity professionals. We're on lots of different platforms now, and see you next time.
Goodbye from him. Goodbye from me.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.